Hey everyone, and welcome to Reading Crossbow. My name is Lana, and as always, I'm here with my co-host Rob.
Hey, Lena, and I'm excited to talk to you today about my book choice this month, which was The Mercy of Gods by James S.A. Corey. We're both big fans of The Expanse, and let's find out whether or not this lived up to the excitement.
Yeah, we were both excited. So if anybody caught our last episode, actually the episode where we were talking about reading these books, we're both like, oh, can't wait. And I had my halfway episode last week where I was very hopeful. But before we get too much into that, I should say that we actually have our 1 year episode next week, and we're going to talk about some exciting new changes on the show. And you've come up with a lot of them, so I'm excited to share them.
Yeah, and I'm excited to also kind of re-review our books for the year and kind of see really what was our favorites.
Oh yeah, because I made some stupid mistakes and I want to talk about those just a little bit. But if you're new here, what we've always done on this show, although it might change next week, is Rob picks a book, I pick a book, usually from different genres, and then we both read them, do a halfway, and discuss. So this may be the last time we do that. I don't know. We'll see. You all can help decide on that too if you join our Discord, which is linked below, where we take feedback from our viewers. But let's get into this. As Rob said, The Mercy of the Gods by James S.A. Corey.
Yes, and this is a space opera alien invasion story. And this is a very interesting kind of book because it starts off and these are humans not on Earth, and they essentially get invaded by the Carrick's Empire, an alien multi-race empire where they come down, pick up species from all over the... We're not sure how big their empire is. Like, is it galaxy-wide, university-wide? I don't know. But they pick up species and try to integrate them into their society. Now, kind of to lean into what does this book kind of mean, it is part of a planned series, and the series is called The Captives' War. That kind of gives you a hint of where this is going.
Well, I don't know that I knew. I know now, but I don't know that I knew on our first episode that this was gonna be a series. Maybe you said it, but I missed it. So when I was reading the jacket cover earlier, I was like, wait a minute, there's more to this, and that's great because it definitely leaves it off for exploration. But big worlds that James S.A. Corey creates.
So during your halfway, you mentioned that this reminded you a bit of the three-body problem, and I mean that series is actually one of my favorites of all time. I really enjoyed that, reading that for the first time about a year or two ago. And I was curious, did that kind of feeling hold up, or maybe is there a different property that you more feel like this reminds you of?
So I did not read the series for the Three Body Problem. I should say that to our viewers. I only watched the Netflix show, which I was fascinated by. The show was off to a great start. I don't love how the Netflix show concluded. I don't know if that's how it happens in the books, but why this book reminded me of it is, first of all, I should say alien invasions are one of the things I'm most sure of happening. I don't know in my lifetime, but I'm pretty damn sure of happening. And also terrified of happening, right? And so in the Three Body Problem, the aliens make people feel like they're going crazy, or they reach out to them first. They kind of get these signs, but basically the thing that reminded me of Mercy of Gods is they take over the sky, and they do it by making I don't know what they call them, but it's almost like these nodes in the atmosphere that can make almost like a screen, and they can make anyone on Earth believe anything that they're seeing in the sky. It doesn't necessarily happen in this, but it sounds like there's like a bunch of ships kind of that go out in the atmosphere and cover and swarm not the Earth, but Earth-like planet that they're on, because it felt very Earth-like. And as I was reading that, I'm like, this is the Three Body Problem. This is terrifying. This is my worst nightmare. Like, I would rather, if we ever get invaded, it be like Independence Day, where there's just a couple large ships over major cities, because I live like in the country. They're not going to get me. at least for a while. I have time to like raid the vet shops like, a zombie apocalypse. I'm gonna be okay. But this makes it seem not okay. Same as Three Body Problem. It's terrifying. I don't love it. But this was different in the fact that the humans never had a choice. And I don't want to give away too much, but like, I don't know, just made it more terrifying to me. It ended up not being like Three Body Problem at all, in my perspective. But yeah, that's the part I got from that.
So both of these books are trying to answer the Fermi paradox, which is, where are all the aliens? And in the case of the Three Body Problem, especially when you get into its sequel novel, Dark Forest, it tries to answer that question of why aren't we seeing an alien society out there? And in this book, it's answering essentially the same question, almost in the exact reverse. Like, these are the two extreme kind of different answers of aliens are the threat. And it's a very interesting the way these two kind of dovetail together because, like I said, it feels like they're answering the same question in two different ways. And I found that to be very interesting as I was going through this book.
Yeah, the approach to aliens in Three Body Problem to me was easier to handle just because they never came on the planet. Whereas in this book, spoiler alert, first few pages, so not really, the aliens end up walking among them and are terrifying, like I said. So yeah, not the way to answer the paradox that I would prefer out of the ones you gave.
So similar to the Three Body Problem, I felt like this book and that book had some kind of character elements in common. But what did you think of the characters?
Okay, so I'm gonna answer that first part before I get to characters too much. The characters in Three Body Problem are scientists, and then same with this one. So they're targeting knowledge, they're targeting scientists. So I wanted to say that as kind of a whole. So that was also a parallel between the two, and also part of what made this book interesting and a way to bring in the unique writing style that James S. A. Corey does, which I talked about in our intro episode to the books about how they talk about science in a way and space in a way that's understandable if you're not someone that's educated on that. We can talk about that more later. I think that actually failed in this book in multiple areas. I think this book was much more difficult to understand. The science was harder to grasp in many areas if you're not used to reading about that. And I actually was a biology major and a chemistry major in college. And some parts in this, I'm like, this is pretty deep. Are you kidding me? It never got like this in the Expanse. And the way that they brought the science into it, I thought was more elevated than it needed to be for the story. Outside of that, so that's just connecting it. The characters I thought were very interesting, well developed, as is in the Corey style. We get a lot of background, so much so that we know some character has like intense depression and has to medicate for it. It's a huge part of the story. We have characters that have been love interests for more of their life. They've known each other like longer than they haven't, and that's a sweet part of the story. And then there's like newly developed love interests. There's always the person who can't love and cracks jokes, and like a younger part of the story, like someone who's still kind of growing with the story and developing a lot. So ton of character development. I really love how Corey puts characters together. Although I will say, I did not get attached to any in this book. Two, if you want me to elaborate when the time comes, I enjoyed more than others.
Now, the reason why I said this reminded me a lot of the Three Body Problem, this is specifically referencing to the books, because they changed the main characters for the TV show, and for good reason, because in the books, the characters are very flat. They don't have, while they have backstory, like one character is a scientist, another one's a police officer, like, especially in the first book, the book is more focused on the ideas and the concepts rather than the characters themselves. That's secondary to the actual hard science of this story. It's very similar to a lot of old classic sci-fi like Foundation or anything by Isaac Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke. A lot of those older science fiction, they focused more on the science fiction concepts rather than the characters. And I felt that way about this book. A lot of these characters have very much the same Z's as far as like what they're about. And that's for good reason. They're all scientists on the same research team. They are very much similar people as far as like their interests and their activities. Yes, there's obvious differences. Like this one has the mental health struggles. This one, a different one, very much sees the world in almost a manipulative type of way. Another one is your average corporate micromanager. And honestly, that character is the only one I felt very strongly about because I hated him so much.
We agree there. Although I don't know that I can agree on your assessments of the characters being somewhat flat. Disagree on that quite a bit, actually.
Well, in the reason why I say they're very flat is they all have a very strong analytical. They look at the situation very analytically, and this is how they, whether it's their internal monologue or when they're talking to each other, like, oh, and there's another character, he makes a lot of jokes, but they're all looking at these situations very similarly, but it makes sense for the story. This is their occupation. So I'm not going to fault it too much, but I think I would have enjoyed this story a little bit more if we'd had a broader diversity of characters. But within the context of this story, it made sense. We got a lot of diversity for the narrow scope of the story.
Yeah, I think it's just interesting. Like they're all signed. It's just like smart people end up doing smart people things, but smart people have other talents as well. We definitely see that in this book, and I think it's explored quite a bit actually. And I don't know. So I can't even say agree to disagree. I just disagree.
Okay.
But yeah, characters I thought was probably one of the best parts. I really enjoyed when the characters rabbit holed in their situation, because yes, they're all scientists, they're all going through the same situation, but they're handling it differently, and you get a peek inside their heads in this, right? This is multiple perspective book, many different characters, and when they're thinking about how to solve the situation, they go down very different paths on how to get there, even though they arrive at the same conclusion most of the time.
Yeah, and like I said, I felt like a lot of them, if you had removed the character for a lot of the internal monologue, when they're making decisions about, oh, what should I do next or what should I do in this situation, I almost could have used the same thought process for any of the characters. But like I said, it kind of makes sense within the context of the story. However, there are a few standouts. Jessin, she's the one with the kind of more mental health struggle. She is actually one of the more interesting characters. So the kind of main character, David or Daffyd, I'm going to go with David. He also kind of has a very analytical worldview that I actually found fascinating because he's very detached from his emotions. And I found that to be actually very fun. Like the way he talks about, especially early in the novel, where he manipulates a conversation, just being like, I'm going to just be quiet and I'm going to make the other guy talk first. And then he will just keep talking because it's uncomfortable to have silence. And that kind of character I found to be very interesting.
Well, it plays into Corey also does political drama in his novels that I've read. I mean, just the Expanse in this. So, like, having a politically dominant character that knows what to do is going to be essential to them, getting out of their situation. Hopefully, we'll see. Only one book in, they're still in their situation. Is critical to how Corey seems to write. I agree. Jessen was one of my favorite characters, made the most development in this story. And also, there is I can't say this without kind of giving a bit more about the story. I cover this in my halfway, so no spoilers here. You know, aliens invade. They take some of the humans with them because they need the scientists to research something. So that's not giving too much away. Being taken from your home, being taken from your planet, that is scary for anyone, and they all process it differently. So how Jessen processes goes down a very dark path. So I actually thought that you were going to say that you like Jessen, because I'm like, Jessen gets a bit scary.
Yeah.
Like, Jessen gets a bit of a badass. So from her circumstances. But we get exposed to multiple different types of aliens in this book. Tons and tons and tons of them. And one of them, without giving much away about what it is, the name of its type is the Swarm. And I actually found myself loving that character. That character actually has some of the most development as the story goes. So my favorites were Jessen. David's interesting just because of the political intrigue and where that's going to go. The Swarm, I'm going to give it the most development award.
Absolutely. I 100% agree.
Fantastic. But that one I feel like is going to be tough for us to talk about. So I don't know that we should, but you can toe that boundary line. And then Campar. Campar is a character that handles their situation, which is tough, with like dry humor or university humor. And sometimes it's not even funny, but people realize he's trying to make them laugh just to add some levity to the situation. And like I find it being funny too. And I'm like, I love this guy. At one point in the story, someone says, why do you do that? I hate that. And he's like, if I don't, I'm going to be a puddle on this floor, like crying and sobbing from trying to handle this stress. So this is what you get. Right. Yeah. Like, he reminds me of the character whose name I always forget from The Expanse. That's just kind of a badass and mouthy.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Campar, in that kind of a situation, he provides a bit of levity. He's the droids from Star Wars. That's kind of providing that little bit of laughter.
Yes.
To take down the tension level a little bit, especially when things ratchet up pretty into dark places, especially mid to late novel. So his contribution is important. So I think overall, I think the characters are very interesting. I obviously have some thoughts about them being a little too similar, but they do all feel like they were a strong attempt was made to make them feel different. The one micromanager character, he is like the worst, like, corporate middle manager that you've ever worked for in your life. Like, even when you get the times when you're in his head and he's like, yeah, I shouldn't say this because this is kind of a dick move, and then he immediately goes into saying the most dickish thing he possibly could. So even he recognizes how awful he is.
Yeah. He does root the story, which I think is great, and his character serves its purpose because they need some sort of normalcy, and he just can't help himself. So the authors are able to very quickly establish a level of normalcy for the story that I think allowed them to build from there. Otherwise, I don't know what they would have done. So that worked out. Okay. But yeah, total dirtbag.
Did you find anything about the book and its general plot to be kind of thought-provoking? And I mention that because of the three-body problem and like some classic sci-fi tropes which come up in this book really kind of made me think about a lot of kind of sci-fi alien invasion type concepts.
Okay, so just two, because you put me on the spot. So we don't get these questions in rehearse. So I actually had no idea I was going to say that. But two things were thought-provoking, maybe not in the way that you're saying. But one of them bothered me, which is actually a setting issue. So in the three-body problem, because I saw the show, so that's visual. And when the aliens actually cover the atmosphere of the planet with their little probe thingies, that's visual, it happens. So in this novel, when they basically say that's happening, like, we've invaded your airspace, you can't leave, we're everywhere. But when they take humans from the planet, They don't take that many, and they seem to take a large concentration from this one university. So that to me was a plot issue that bothered me, because I expected there to be like, I know it's not Earth, but like maybe if it were Earth, like someone from China, India, US, EMEA, like more diverse group of people. And so it made me think, like, is this like a little tiny baby planet? Like, is it super super small? Because this is confusing to me, because they take over the planet. It's clear the humans can't do anything. They're forced. What happened is what happened. There was no way of getting around it, right? And this is where you took from this one small area. I thought that very interesting, and that was thought provoking to me, and it disrupted the story. The second part that pulled me out of the story a bit and was thought provoking was the aliens themselves.
Really?
Reminded me of an old. Yeah. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. It was like a Twilight episode with, like, maybe back from like the 60s, 70s, and they're putting these creatures together with, like, foam and old foam latex. And it felt fake to me. It just felt fake. And I was like, this can't be real. So even as I'm reading, I'm like, this can't be real. This can't be what the aliens are going to be. They're going to get on their little spaceship. They're going to go somewhere else. And these are just going to be the little, like, army ant aliens. This is what I'm thinking. And then they're going to get where they're going. And that's where we're going to get the superior cerebral beings that made the funky creatures do it. But no, it's just the funky creatures. And by the way, the book describes them, and this is early, so again, not being crazy spoilery, they're like praying mantises, and they have like thoraxes, and they have these big like ant bellies that sway behind them when they walk, and some of them have lots of arms, and they even mention feeding arms, which by the way is disgusting. I couldn't get over feeding arms, and they say that a lot. So like, I don't know that that's what you're asking, but that was the only thought-provoking things for me where I was like, how? What? And I got stuck.
Okay. So, yeah, because there definitely is a praying mantis type of description to it, but I actually got far more on like lobster, where you have your big claws, which is the more praying mantis arms, but then they have the little ones that actually do all the feeding,
Yeah.
And I found that I did find that to be kind of fun. So in a lot of sci-fi, like whether it's Three Body, Foundation, iRobot, a lot of times what they do is they're trying to convey a concept, a science fiction type of concept, a what if. And that's what I mean by the thought provoking for me. And in this book, it was, if we ran into aliens, how would they see us and how would we see them? And in the case of this book, it makes the argument that we are no different than any other animal of burden as far as how humans treat animals. We see them as useful labor, and their lives are fairly disposable when they're no longer of use. And that's how the aliens like perceive humanity. And not just humanity, like everyone that's not them. It's all, you are a tool to be used just like any other animal. And they actually refer to aliens that they've subjugated as animals. And I found that to be really interesting, because in a lot of stories that are science fiction that has aliens, it's not often that that's the dominant position.
Right. It also, I mean, we get this question even like just in our own current world, if like I get sentient from that, right? Like we find out like, ew, lobsters are sentient. They don't want to go in that boiling pot. Like octopus are sentient. Do we still eat them? Like, that's not as deep as what you're saying, but it reminded me of that as well. It's like, just because it doesn't look like us is us doesn't mean there's not a sentience there. And this happens often, where there's some creatures that appear to be like similar to creatures that we would have here on Earth or in this planet that they're talking. So they look like something else. So the humans automatically assume, well, this isn't very sentient because it's like, this looks like a little miniature ape or something. And it's clear that this knowledge, this power, this could be in any animal, and so just not to assume. But I don't know, Rob. I just feel like the descriptions that the author chose to use as the main dominant army was just not what I would have gone with, despite what you're saying, despite, you know, this like kind of animal presence and them being above them and we're all useful for work that's not them, and this whole underlying sentient issue, even with like there's berries in this book where they have to work with them in this lab, and one of the lab technicians goes to like kind of peel the skin to test the berry, but she doesn't know because there's so many funky creatures around her that are sentient. Like she's like, I'm so sorry, I hope this isn't hurting you. And she begins talking to it because she's learned so much at this point that I can't assume anything isn't smarter than me, even this berry. And so, yeah, super cool. I just feel like the characters didn't match that still. And no matter how hard the author's trying to drive that home, it is never going to be a praying mantis for me. It just doesn't. Pick a horse. Pick actually anything that could talk to you. And I'm never going to pick bugs. Actually, just bugs in general. These are bug-like. I hated it.
So is it just because they're bugs? Because, you know, you got like Starship Troopers or Babylon 5 all had like multi-limbed bug-like aliens that were the kind of villains of those pieces.
Yeah, I hate that too. Bring up any bug. Beetlejuice, the little talking like creature. Men in Black, when the cockroach can talk. I think I actually, maybe you hit the nail on the head there. I hate that. It's so gross. Not bugs.
All right. So let's talk about the setting a little bit. Do you have any particular thoughts about this setting and the lore of this world?
Yeah, so normally James S.A. Corey books are, I mean, well, it's Expanse, right? They're expansive. And you feel like anytime a book goes to a new area, you really understand what's going on in that setting. And so that was actually done in this one too. Minus the comments I made earlier about the planet where they abduct these humans from. I'm still concerned. That planet was never fully described to me. I have a feeling it's very, very tiny. Maybe a moon of something else, because there's no way they swarmed that and only took the amount of people that they took. Weird. So that part baffling to me. But the part that's cool is we get some description about why the destination they went to is the way that it is. And it's sort of outlined on the cover of the book here, which is we have the Carricks, who's been, let's call it the universe, for lack of a better word, because we don't know how big this is. But it's Corey, and there's at least 3 books planned. I think someone said it's a trilogy. Could be more. Who knows? And we know that in that book they travel. It's alluded to in this book and talked about that there's going to be travel. So we know they're going to visit worlds. So what's interesting about this setting is that the Carricks have been doing this for, we can't even, millennia, centuries, we don't know, forever. They basically say since always. Forever. And they've been slowly, a small force dominating. Maybe they started out with a small species, kept going. They amassed so much that now they're just impenetrable. I mean, you just can't beat them. And so because of that knowledge and because of the workforce that they've built, like you said, they value each different race as being useful or not useful. If you're useful, then what are we going to use your skills for? And there's a part in the book where one of the characters, through this like voice box where they can talk to other species, overhears or finds out, I can't quite remember how it happens, about one of the types of the species on this planet that they go to is basically responsible for building all of this kind of beautiful networks. And basically they're about as tall as you can see, and there's so many levels. And when they first get there, our scientists are like, how? And these are some of the brightest minds in the world, and they can't put it together. And this weird looking, I think horse-like creature, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, like horse giraffe thing or whatever, they're all weird. It's like, oh yeah, we did that. Like we always do this. Like we go to a planet, we build these things. We go to a planet, we build these things. And other creatures are responsible for doing other things because that's what they're good at. So the Carricks takes these species and allows them to do what they're good at. But are they better at other things too? Is this the one thing they tested them on? I'm not sure. And they keep repurposing these groups for the same thing. So I'm actually curious because the guy said like this is what our species does. So if we move to another world, planet, whatever, space, I don't know, in the next book, are we going to get similarities? Because I would actually expect that we do based off the information we've got here. But I don't know. I found that to be very interesting to me. You have to be useful, and they use you for what you're useful for. And there doesn't seem to be much like space to expand beyond that.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier about the whole Fermi paradox, where this is trying to answer the same question from the third three body problem, but in a different way. And in this case, it's the grabby aliens. And it's not the, Harvey Weinstein grabby. They are.
Ugh.
So the idea of the grabby alien is that basically they're the ones that go out and basically they're the ones that are preventing everyone else from talking to us because they're impeding everyone. So in this case, it's because they go to a planet, basically scoop it up, and move along. So they're essentially preventing any advanced civilization from becoming a spacefaring civilization that could compete against them. And that's where the three body problem, especially in the second book, definitely goes in a different direction. So as far as for the setting itself, what I found to be the most interesting is the thing that's not really answered yet, which is the homeworld of the humans. They're on a homeworld which is called Onjin. I mentioned in our kind of book reveal episode that kind of reminded me from the TV show Shogun, and that also comes from a book. In this world, it's clear that humans showed up on this planet within the last few centuries or millennia because they are completely disconnected from the chain of life in this world. So all species on this world are related except for humans and some related species who showed up much later in the record, very recently comparatively. And that doesn't really get answered. And I find that actually to be the biggest kind of question I have with the setting is like, why is that? Does that mean there's other humans out there? Because the Carricks don't seem to know about humanity. Or maybe they do. It's hard to say. But I found that to be kind of the biggest question I have from this book is I'm sitting there, I'm like, where did these humans come from? How did they get there? Is this a trap? Is this humanity fighting back against the Carricks, and this whole world doesn't even realize that they're a booby trap? We just don't know. And this whole book is fascinating as far as that goes. Like, what are the humans, and relatedly, how are people fighting back against this Carrick's empire? And you get some hints about it.
Yeah, and part of those hints we should mention too are from excerpts from a journal. And we've got this in many, many books that we've read where we get like a piece of the story from like another artifact, and it always says like recovered from, right? I mean, even this happened in Fourth Wing, which is nowhere close to this book, and we get that a lot. And I don't know if that's a cheat code for like authors to drop like a little bit here and there, and that's one of the ways we're getting this kind of information. But yeah, that stood out to me too. It's super interesting. At one point, I think one of the humans mentions it too. It's not just from the excerpt about like there's not much that we know about this and we're not sure why. Nobody really knows.
Yeah,
that is weird. Super weird. I would have almost preferred all that knowledge to just come from the recovered information from
yeah, because there was a few spots like in the book where a character is like, and that was the last time he ever saw her again. And I was like, damn it, don't tell me that stuff. That's like the omniscient narrator. And
yeah.
And that's actually like the least satisfying as far as like that kind of narrative goes. It's not even like Novola, where it's the character that you're learning about in the future narrating back to you. This is an unknown omniscient narrator from the future just telling you, oh yeah, no, things gonna get weird. Like humanity's gonna fight back. Like, and it's interesting how that goes. It's not my favorite narrative style, but I'm not opposed to it. It's just not my favorite. That's a personal preference.
And that kind of takes us into the writing style a bit, which we don't have to spend a ton of time on, but like I found the writing style in this situation to be distracting. I mean, on one page, we could sometimes get 4 or 5 viewpoints. Like seriously, sometimes it's like 3 sentence paragraphs, and now we're in Jessen's head, and oh wait, we switched to David now, and oh suddenly it's the Swarm now, and it's like that was not my favorite. I have to say that really kind of bothered me a bit. And when we have like excerpts from this record, sometimes they weren't at the beginning of a chapter like we would typically get. They're actually in the middle of a page, just kind of out of nowhere. Very odd. So this was all over the place. And if you're fans of James S. A. Corey, I would say this isn't typically how they write.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree. Not my favorite style. It was interesting the way it was written. You know, honestly, I looked forward anytime I saw italics text because I was like, "Oh, the Swarm's coming up."
Oh, hey, we got him.
And so
Except
I was always
maybe in the early part.
Okay.
When I wasn't quite sure. They didn't do enough of a job elaborating on the Swarm. It got a little confusing. Towards the end, agree. I was like, oh, it's my favorite character.
Yeah,
Sweet.
When you turn the page and you see a big block of italics, you know the Swarm is about to take over the narrative, and it's interesting. It
is interesting. Best part of the book. Yeah. But for classic Corey fans, we should say this is different. This isn't Justin Holden's point of view, for example. Like we're used to getting something like this is all over the place, and it was actually the first time, and I'm probably wrong about this, someone's gonna say something, where I felt like I sensed 2 different writers. And I don't know how they go about their writing process, but I'm like, was this page written by someone else, or was this edited and now this part was put in here? Because, and it probably has nothing to do with the writers and more to do with the switching of perspectives constantly. It's chaos. Now, is that intentional? Because the setting's chaos. What's happening is chaos. It's all chaos. Was the writing supposed to go with that? If so, I don't think it was necessary. Okay. But it happens. I kept up enough.
And that's an interesting point of view of maybe that the constant switching of point of view characters is to keep you, unsettled as far as you're try to give the reader a sense of the disconnected nature of these people's lives. But if that was the intention, it could have been done a little bit more explicitly or obviously.
Cleaner. It's just a mess.
So at this point, we'd normally kind of review the map, and, it's sci-fi. They rarely have maps. That's fine. So we're going to just rate the book and see how we feel about this book as a whole. So you see here the books that we've reviewed over the last year. This will be our final review for season 1. And I'm kind of excited to see, where do you place this book amongst all the illustrious books we've already reviewed?
So this is tough for me because I'm having the same problem that I had with Nivola, actually, which, as viewers can see here, I rated that a 2, which is not bad on our rating, but not good. But one of the things with Nivola is I still think about a certain character that just never got her plot answered. It's very interesting to me. So I'm connected to two particular characters in this book that I actually really, really want to see what happens to them. And that is Jessen. Because I have a feeling, oh my gosh, Jessen, badass, right? Right? And then the Swarm, which we're on purpose not telling you all too much about because it's just fun to read. That was fun to read for me. But outside of those 2 things, nothing's compelling me to read this. Corey, for me, has always done a great job with making me very excited about the worlds. Lots of characters that I care about. Super interesting, super cool. And I just didn't get it here, especially in the main characters. And maybe it's because of The Expanse. Maybe it's because I know that these authors are also producers. I don't know if our viewers know that, but if you've watched The Expanse, they actually wrote and produced that as well. And that's actually rare that you get the author of a book who gets to decide what goes in a TV show and what doesn't,
Okay.
right? Because
Yeah.
normally it's like, did the author support that decision or did they not? Well, they did because they wrote it. And I have a hard time picturing this as a show. And maybe they're just like, fuck it. Like, we already did a show. We don't care. We're rolling in gobs of money. We're never making this into a show. No one wants to see lobster creatures like trying to fight humans, which I don't even know how that works. And so they're just like, what? We're not making another show. Maybe they are, but I can't, because it's them. Because The Expanse was turned into a show, I'm having a really hard time picturing it. I'm not sure I want to rate it just yet because I want to give you time to kind of respond to that. I'll
Okay.
go into it more. I don't know. I don't want to rate it too early. I'm stuck.
So I mentioned earlier that this reminded me of other kind of classic sci-fi or even modern sci-fi that's written in that classic way, where they have some very interesting themes. They're exploring a science fiction concept, but maybe the characters aren't quite as strong, especially in the early books. And Three Body Problem is a good example of that. Foundation is a good example of that, especially the books for both, less so than the TV shows. And so I find myself, when I think about those other books, the first book is not my favorite. And yet, by the time I get to the second book, I'm completely hooked. And any issue I had with that first book is completely forgiven because it set up all of those great ideas. It that needed a lot of work to set it up, and now we're going to start knocking down those pins. So this sounds very similar to what I mentioned about Swordcatcher when we reviewed that book, where it was a great
Fair.
setting book, but not necessarily the best as far as a plot, because it's a great setup for what's going to come. And I still feel that way about Swordcatcher. That my opinion there hasn't changed. But for this book, it does actually have a plot. It does, things happen, and a story is advanced during this book that I feel that Swordcatcher didn't quite get as that far. So I agree. This is a tough challenge because I do feel good about this series. I feel very good about the series. I think it's going to go somewhere very cool. I'm not sure this book on its own merits a very high score yet, but if once I get book 2, I could immediately just I feel like I would be pushing it forward as long as it goes the way I think it is. And so I'm torn here.
Yeah, and when you mentioned Swordcatcher, that reminded me too. Like, Swordcatcher's a book, but I might actually change the rating on. And I'll leave that up for the episode that we're going to do that on. So, because when you like an author, it does change. You know, you know you need to get to that second book. You know their style, right? I know Claire. I know what's kind of coming. I know her world building. I know I can't wait to read the next one after Swordcatcher. I'm gonna read the next one. But if I'm just comparing this off Corey, yes, I love The Expanse. I also know I stopped at book 5 in The Expanse because I got too space cowboyed out. So I'm taking that into consideration. Also, the first book of The Expanse was fantastic. That is a way that you bring readers in. You write a fantastic first book. And I think it's more common that the first book's fantastic. The second book's kind of like, oh, shoot, I can't wait for the third one to wrap this up. It's more kind of story building.
Yeah.
Right? They're doing their world traveling. So for this to not stand out for me as like, I wrote a killer first book to our next saga, I was very much disappointed. And unfortunately, we were so excited. We're both so excited. And look at us sitting here like, I don't know. We're kind of like on the fence. So here's what I'm going to do. Because I owe it to you to rate this. And I said I was going to. I'm just going to compare this to some of the other books we've read so far.
Yeah,
the best ones I can compare this to are the sci-fi books. And we'll do this probably more in a future episode. I know we've talked about wanting to rank some books in our year. But really, we've read The Tainted Cup. We've read Some Desperate Glory. and I guess maybe a little bit starter villain in terms of sci-fi. And that's not a lot to go off of, but I can say
Well, you're
this.
missing a couple. You're missing the
What am I missing?
the book that would not burn and the lion.
I felt like the book that wouldn't burn was fantasy.
I very much feel sci-fi on that one, but that's
Okay. We'll get back to that. That's fine.
sure.
Oh, I'm gonna compare this
Oh, and
for the
Gunmetal Gods.
strongest
Actually,
Gunmetal Gods. I still think of that as fantasy. I guess yeah. Okay. The line for sci-fi fantasy probably for me shouldn't end at space, but it tends to be space a lot of the time. But Some Desperate Glory, I want to go back to that.
yeah.
Because Some Desperate Glory I got stuck on. I gave it a 3. I honestly don't know if I'd give it a 3. That might get re-ranked too. I struggled with that one. But the interesting thing about Some Desperate Glory is the characters were actually pretty darn good. Like, really great characters in that one, and
Yeah.
very well done. And even though I didn't like a lot of elements of that book, I still do think about those characters, and I will not on this one, other than Jessin, like I said, in the Swarm. And that's not enough. I remember so much about Some Desperate Glory, and I think I've already forgot about a lot of the characters in this one. And actually, let's just say a lot of people die in this book. You've made fun of my books actually slaughtering people off, but this one vies for the top book maybe on amount of people who die. I'm going to say that. But I don't like this as much as Some Desperate Glory, and I give that a 3. And I love James S.A. Corey, but this is a 2.
Oh.
Yeah. Are you surprised?
A little bit, but I mean,
I'm surprised too. I didn't think I'd say that.
I mean, looking at your list, it's in good company. Like it's there with the Lion and Navola and Dragonfall and Poppy Wars, all of which were just amazing books. So I'm glad it's with all the all-time greats.
They're all your books.
So when I look at the books on this list, I see Poppy War, Last Magician, and Fourth Wing in my 3 area, where I felt like those books are working very hard at setting something up in the future. They're still independently an interesting story, but this book feels a lot more like a setup for future things, and those books do as well. So looking at how I've rated things in the past, I think this is a 3 for me. This is where I would put it as far as the other books where I kind of had the same feeling. There's something interesting here, but it's not amazing yet. But I am very hopeful because I feel like, especially like Three Body Problem as the example, Dark Forest is probably one of my all-time favorite books now. And that's the second book in that series. Because that's where the whole series just turns on its head and starts having some amazing science fiction concepts brought into that story. Is it perfect? I mean, no. There's my biggest frustration with that was actually similar to this one, which is an omniscient narrator that just tells you things that are almost spoilers. So there's one scene, and I think it's in Dark Forest, where an event is happening where you don't know what's about. Everything could go terribly wrong. And humanity just ceases to exist. And that's up in the air. You don't know what's about to happen. And then all of a sudden this omniscient narrator comes out and says, 8 months from now, a AI reviewed all the sensor footage, and here's what happened. And it's like, well, crap, you just told me what happened 8 months from now. That means there is an 8 months from now. And that was really frustrating when I read that book, despite the fact I loved that book. And I feel that way about this one. I think there's some frustration, but it could be a book I love. But it needs at least the rest of the series to be written first.
Yeah, so all good points. I think it's interesting. I think we both kind of thought this was going to be a 5 for both of us, which we actually haven't had both of us have a shared 5 yet. And this was our hopeful This is gonna be our 5. I know it. I actually think out of all the books that we've read, this one has the potential to jump the most tiers. I think it's fair to say, kind of like with Mistborn, with Sanderson, like where do you jump in on the Cosmere, for example, or where do you start with Sanderson books? Mistborn is a great first book to start at, and that's why I picked that one for us to start at. I would say this is not an entry book for Corey. If I'm being like honest with viewers who've never read Corey before, I would start with The Expanse. Saying that, having only read The Expanse, I've not read the novellas and only read this one. But so not the Corey starting point, in my opinion. But maybe for people who really love sci-fi and read sci-fi all the time, even though I'm not excited to read the next book yet, I'm gonna wait for you and I'm gonna wait for the internet and follow suit. I would say pick this up. I would say sci-fi people should pick this up. And the reason why that's a strong recommendation for me, despite giving it a 2, is because conceptually, and what I see that Corey's building here and some of the things that you pointed out in this episode that I'm like, oh, like aha moments as you said them, I'm like, this has a lot of potential to be great.
I couldn't agree more. I think this is potentially going to be an amazing series, and I don't want to overhype it again to myself. I'm still excited about this series, and I will definitely be picking up the next one as soon as it comes out.
And I will be waiting for you to pick up the next one. See how you see it comes out. Wait for you to get back to me, and then I'll get back to all of you guys. But it's time to also thank you all. We've had a ton of subscribers. We're about ready to actually hit our next goal, which is 200. Maybe we passed 150. That was a goal. So now 200 is on the horizon. Stay tuned. Join us next week as we talk about what's next for Reading Crossbow, because as of today's recording date, we don't know.
So be sure to like and subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. It really helps us out, and it's just a little click for you.